Snow whispered against the lamplit platform of Red Hollow Station, each flake descending like a forgotten word. The night train was late again, and the wind carried the smell of iron and pine, sharp and cold as loneliness. Elias Boone, age 30, leaned against a frost-crusted post, broad shoulders lost beneath a worn duster, his Stetson low over eyes the color of dusk. A man carved from silence, waiting for a shipment he'd forgotten to care about. He heard her before he saw her, the trembling sob of someone trying not to be heard. He turned toward the sound, slow, cautious, as though afraid the night might shatter. A woman stepped from the shadow, the lamplight catching the snow tangled in her dark braids. Marietta Crow, age 20, stood barefoot on the frozen boards, a thin shawl drawn tight around her small frame. Her cheeks were flushed with cold and shame, and her gaze trembled like a candle flame. "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "Please marry me." The words fell between them like a spark in dry grass. Elias straightened, uncertain he'd heard right. He was no stranger to strange nights or stranger requests, but there was something about her, an ache beneath the desperation that felt too familiar. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low, careful, "you must be cold. There's a wagon shed down the road. I'll see you there, get you warm." But she shook her head, tears glinting like glass. "No. Please, marry me. I'll give you a love you never expected." The sentence lingered in the air, trembling, wild, half a promise, half a plea. Elias studied her through the snow's veil. There was no madness in her eyes, only ruin and the raw courage of someone with nothing left to lose. He removed his gloves slowly, as though the gesture itself might frighten her. "Why me?" he asked. Her breath hitched. "Because you look like a man who's lost something too." The wind moaned across the empty tract. He could have turned away, should have. But her words struck a quiet place in him, one he'd long thought buried. He saw his own ghost reflected in her trembling stance, a heart still standing after the fire, unsure if it deserved to beat again. "Come," he said finally, offering his hand. "We'll talk on the way." She hesitated before touching him, her fingers small and trembling against his rough palm. Together they crossed the drifting snow toward his wagon, silence walking beside them like an old companion. The ride through the storm was wordless. Snow clung to the reins, the horse's breath steaming in the dark. Every so often, Elias glanced sideways, at her pale face beneath the shawl, at the way she pressed her hands together as if praying to stay real. He wanted to ask 100 questions but found none that didn't sound cruel. When they reached his cabin at the edge of Red Hollow, dawn was a faint blue ghost over the hills. He led her inside, the door closing on the storm with a heavy sigh. The hearth stood cold, but within minutes a fire sparked, orange light spilling across the wooden floor. She stood near it, unmoving, as though afraid to step into warmth. He poured coffee, black and bitter, and set a cup before her. "Tell me," he said quietly, "why you asked a stranger for a thing like that." Her voice trembled like smoke. "My husband died 2 winters ago. He was Cherokee, a scout. The snow took him while he was hunting. The town said it was my curse, said no man who loves a crow lives long. They stopped speaking to me, stopped selling to me. I lost the cabin, the horses, everything." She stared into the fire. "Tonight I was going to walk till I couldn't. Then I saw you." Elias let the silence breathe between them. The crackle of the fire was the only witness to her words. He knew that exile, that hollow ache of being half wanted and half despised. "Folks here don't like what they don't understand," he said. "They say things about me too." She looked up, surprised. "About you?" He smiled faintly. "My father was white. My mother wasn't." Understanding flickered across her face. 2 outcasts, drawn together by the same cold world. "Maybe that's why I found you," she whispered. The fire softened her features, and for a heartbeat he could almost see the woman she must have been before grief took her voice. He set another log on the flame, feeling something shift quietly inside him, an old instinct stirring, the urge to protect something fragile. Days turned to weeks. Snow fell endlessly, sealing the cabin from the rest of Red Hollow. They lived in the rhythm of survival, chopping wood, fetching water, cooking in silence. Yet between those silences bloomed something delicate. When he left his gloves on the hearth, she'd warm them before handing them back. When she sang softly while cleaning fish, he'd listen, pretending to busy himself with the horses. It was a slow thaw, the kind that required patience. But the town had not forgotten. One gray morning, a rider appeared, Sheriff Clay, hat dripping snow, face carved with suspicion. "Elias," he said, dismounting, "folks been talking. Bringing a woman to your cabin without a preacher's word, it don't sit right." Elias met his gaze without flinching. "She's safe here." "Safe, maybe," Clay said, glancing toward the door where Marietta stood, silent, shawl drawn close. "But not forgiven." The words hung like frost. The sheriff tipped his hat and rode off, leaving only hoof prints and the echo of judgment. That night, Elias sat by the fire, jaw tight, thoughts heavy. Marietta watched him from the other side of the room, her eyes reflecting the flame. "I don't want you branded for my sins," she said softly. He looked up. "You ain't sin to me." The way he said it, steady, certain, made her throat close. She turned away, but tears still fell, silent and shining. The next morning, before she woke, Elias hitched the wagon. When she came outside, hair undone, the cold biting her cheeks, he said only, "Put on your coat. We're going to town." Her heart lurched. "Why?" He looked toward the horizon. "Because I'm tired of hiding what's right." The journey down the hill was quiet, the town waiting below like a frozen judgment. As they entered Main Street, every curtain shifted, every porch stilled. The saloon door swung open, and whispers rose like dust. Elias held his head high, his hands steady as he helped Marietta down. Together they walked toward the small chapel at the end of the street. The preacher, startled, wiped his glasses as they entered. "Mr. Boone," he said, "you sure about this?" Elias nodded once. "I am." Marietta stood beside him, heart pounding so hard she thought the floor might feel it. The ceremony was brief. No flowers, no guests, no music. Just the snow outside, pressing its face to the windows. When the preacher spoke the words, "Do you take this woman?" Elias's answer was low but unwavering. "I do." And when it came her turn, her voice cracked, yet the truth still found its way through the break. "I do." The preacher smiled softly and joined their hands. "Then by God's grace, you are husband and wife." For a moment neither moved. Then Elias touched her cheek with the gentleness of a man who understood the value of what cannot be bought. "You've got a name again," he murmured. She smiled through her tears. "And you've got a reason to stop running." When they stepped outside, the crowd that had gathered parted without a word. Even old Mrs. Duncan, who once hissed curses at Marietta's back, lowered her eyes. Snow fell steadily, soft as forgiveness. They walked through it together, the world around them hushed and watching. Elias's arm was around her shoulders. Her fingers clutched his coat. The town, the storm, the whispers, none of it mattered anymore. They had stepped through judgment into something gentler. As they passed the station, the sound of the distant train drifted over the hills, the same tracks where they'd first met. The memory flickered between them, the cold, the desperation, the spark of a promise neither dared to believe. Elias slowed, glancing toward the empty platform. "Strange," he said quietly, "how it all began here." Marietta nodded. "And ended here too." "No," he said, eyes softening. "It's just beginning." She leaned against him, breath mingling with his in the pale light. For the first time in years, she felt the future reach for her hand. They reached the cabin again by twilight. Inside, the fire burned high, throwing gold across the walls. The wedding bands gleamed faintly on their hands, simple, unadorned, but real. Elias poured 2 mugs of coffee and handed her one. "To surviving the storm," he said. "To finding warmth in it," she answered. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the scars of the world. The old house creaked, content. From somewhere deep in the hills came the cry of a coyote, haunting yet alive. Elias looked at her, the woman who'd once stood barefoot in the snow and asked for the impossible. And he knew then that every road he'd taken, every loss, every lonely night had led him here. She met his gaze, her lips parting with the faintest smile. "Do you think people can really begin again?" she asked. He took her hand, thumb tracing the faint pulse beneath her wrist. "We just did." Later, when the night deepened and the fire dimmed, she hummed that same song he'd heard once before, low, trembling, beautiful. He closed his eyes, listening. Each note carried something. Grief, yes, but also grace, the kind that comes only after the breaking. Years later, Red Hollow would still tell the story of the widow and the giant who defied the snow. They'd say love came to them not like lightning but like dawn, slow, persistent, unstoppable. The cabin still stood on the hill, its chimney forever breathing light into winter. Travelers said that on nights when the storm howled hardest, you could see two silhouettes through the frost, one tall, one small, moving gently behind the curtain of snow. And if you listened close, you might hear her voice, soft as memory, whispering through the wind. "Please marry me. I'll give you a love you never expected." Maybe that's what love truly is, a warmth that arrives when all other fires have gone out, asking nothing but the courage to stay.